Good morning and welcome to Frank's School. Well, we'll see if Blaze the kitten tries to knock over my camera again. I wanted to say something about Tolstoy. This is the 6-year, 72nd day first video, and I want to revisit Tolstoy. I did mention him the very first year I was teaching as an example of comparative literature. I introduced to my students, 7th and 8th graders mostly, the concept of comparative literature. Great literature first written in some other language besides English. And I mentioned Jules Verne and the book Heidi and Swiss Family Robinson, books like that. And I mentioned Tolstoy, and I just mentioned War and Peace and Anna Karenina. Don't say very much about them, just so that the kids have heard the name, they've heard of those books, but I have had reason to revisit Tolstoy, and I'm going to take a chance on this cat and let him go away here. I was rereading Back to the Land, a book that I think I talked about before, a history of that movement in America over the last 100 years or so, and Tolstoy's mentioned, and I'd seen him mentioned before, and I'd expected Henry David Thoreau to be mentioned. I thought there'd be more about the Romantics, especially the British Romantic, well, and German, British Romantic poets and authors about returning, the wonders of the land of nature. But Tolstoy, I didn't understand why he was mentioned, and it didn't say that much about him. But eventually I looked into it, and I found out that he had written one of his last books was a book called Resurrection, a novel. Not as big as either one of these, but very long indeed. And I bought it. I actually read it, which is a huge feat for me because I am a slow reader and I don't read fiction very much at all. If I read 2 pages, I usually end up falling asleep at night. But I did. I read the whole thing. It's dark. I don't know. Probably won't reread it. I don't think I'd have time. But I did read it, and one of the reasons that I was drawn to it is because that's the very name that I've chosen for the time being that I use for the movie that I wish someone would make, that I would make if I could. The Wordless movie that I've thought, well, there's a whole playlist on Frank's School channel called Resurrection where I tell about that movie. So that enough with a famous writer using that as his title. I was drawn to it, and I read it. Now, before I go on to this, one of the things that I had learned about Tolstoy that was new was his support for a group of dissident Christians, I guess you'd call them, called the Dooku Bors. Eventually, they were resettled in Western Canada. They were quite extremist, and he tried to do what he could to support them. I've also need to look into more of this. Tolstoy had great disdain for Shakespeare. And Shakespeare's so highly admired, and I admire him so much. I've got to look into that some more. I think he's got that wrong. But I'll have to look into it more. Maybe later I'll say about that. One other thing before I get to this is I did know that Tolstoy, as he got older, he really had a change in his thinking and in his spiritual life and his economic life too. He was rich. He was a count. He had a lot of land, and he was really the most famous writer practically in the world at the time. Maybe he was the most famous novelist in the world at that time. Well, anyway, he gave stuff all away. He wanted to be poor. He took up the garb of a peasant toward the end of his life. He gave his copyrights away to his family's great distress because there went their wealth. I guess it was later given back to them after his death by the Russian government. I think there's so much about Tolstoy I don't yet know. But I thought, I should mention him. He's worth looking at, I think. And Resurrection, one other thing I should say, his writing, I said to a friend of mine, Michael Hernkane, I said, I've never read anything quite like this. It's so incredibly detailed, his perception of things and why. I have to wonder, is it worth it? maybe he was being paid by the word like Charles Dickens was. I don't know, but I mean, it just, and to that I'll grant him some genius. His ability to perceive these tiny little details in fiction. I mean, and present you with this real detailed picture of what he sees. All right, well, you behave though. Well, anyway, so he went around barefoot in peasant garb, and really, well, you can find out about that. But anyway, resurrection is very largely about the prison system in Russia, the penal system. You know, I won't tell you the plot, but through the course of it, he gets to know very well inside prisons of that time and what was happening to him. It's one of the reasons it's a rather dreary book. But anyway, yesterday I went to the local jail. I drive by it every day. Every time I go to town, I drive by it. And on the way in, I thought to myself, you know, I'm going to stop there. I did that once before, 5-10 years ago, because I thought maybe I could see what books they have in there. What's their library look like? And now that I'm retired, I actually began to think, well, maybe I could teach in there, see what their lives are like, maybe liven them up a little bit. But also on a selfish level, to meet those people in the prison, to see what those people are like. And I would say that's probably because I've read this. And Tolstoy got me thinking about prisons of his time, but also prisons now. So, you know, I'll let you know. I've got to fill out a volunteer form, and it's going to be sort of interesting because I have a clean record. You know, they check on your background and all that kind of stuff. But then the whole discussion with the woman that sort of runs the facility, I don't know if she's a warden or not, about, well, the structure. You know, what are you going to teach, and is it to help them get a degree, or what's it going to be? And hopping through, jumping through these hoops that they set up in order to get in there to teach. You know, we'll see. I mean, I could easily just say, it's not worth it. It would be a hassle for me anyway. But I don't know. I'll let you know. Certainly I'll let you know if I start doing it more. So there's a little bit about Tolstoy, especially Tolstoy, the old man. More, very much more, I think, for me to learn. Bye for now.